Bobcat Kittens, rescued by a house cat, who became their new mom, early one late spring morning in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Georgia. Leonard Hale pulled his old pickup truck onto the shoulder of a narrow, winding road. The 74-year-old former criminal psychology specialist had just left the farmer's market when he spotted flashing lights ahead. A police car sat parked beside the forest, and several figures moved around something on the ground. He walked closer, his boots crunching on gravel. Two young officers stood with a handful of people in wildlife conservation uniforms. On the grass lay a dead bobcat, her body already stiff. One paw stretched toward her kittens as if she'd tried to reach them in her final moment. Three tiny kittens huddled against her cooling fur, soaked from the morning dew, trembling. Matt, one of the officers, had been Leonard's student years ago in a training course. He looked up and his face showed relief, but also something else. Calculation. Maybe hope. "Mr. Hale, I'm glad you stopped." He glanced at the kittens, then back at Leonard. His voice dropped lower. "If it were Mary, what would she do?" Leonard's chest tightened. The question felt like a trap, like Matt was asking him to be someone he wasn't anymore. His wife had spent decades rehabilitating injured wildlife before cancer took her 2 years ago. 2 years, 3 months, and 16 days, to be exact. Leonard had stopped counting after the first year, but his body remembered the absence in ways his mind tried to forget. She would have already scooped up these kittens, would have been planning their care before anyone else had finished processing what happened. But Mary was gone, and he'd spent 2 years learning to live with that absence by keeping everything at a distance. He looked at the three small bodies pressed against their mother, trying to wake something that would never move again. One kitten mewed weakly, nosing at the mother's face. Another pawed at her ear. The third just shivered. Leonard's throat closed. He turned away, stared at the tree line, tried to find words that wouldn't commit him to anything. Mary would find them another mother. It was the truth, but it was also evasion. He didn't say he would help, didn't offer to take them, just stated a fact about a woman who no longer existed. They buried the bobcat beneath a large oak, the conservation staff doing most of the work while Leonard stood back. He'd buried Mary under an oak too, in the cemetery on the south side of the town. Same smell of turned earth, same helpless feeling of covering something precious with dirt. But when they finished, when everyone else had stepped away, he found himself kneeling beside the grave. He lit a small candle he kept in his truck, one of the emergency candles Mary had always insisted on. His hands shook as he struck the match. The three kittens huddled together a few feet away, watching him with round, uncomprehending eyes. He looked at them for a long moment, something painful expanding in his chest. "Rest easy," he finally said, his voice rough. "The little ones will be safe." It was a promise he had no business making, but he made it anyway. The drive home felt longer than usual, weighted by the memory of three small bodies pressed against their mother's cooling fur. Leonard's hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary, trying to push away the image of those dark, bewildered eyes. The smell of turned earth seemed to cling to his clothes, mixing with the morning coffee still cooling in his truck's cup holder. When he pulled into his driveway, the house sat exactly as he'd left it, windows reflecting the climbing sun, Mary's wind chime hanging motionless in the still air. Inside, the sun greeted him with a soft trill, winding around his ankles with such determined affection that he had to kneel down or risk stumbling. He buried his fingers in her cream-colored fur, steadier here than he'd been at the roadside. "I almost brought home trouble today," he murmured into her warmth. "But I didn't. I walked away, just like I'm supposed to." That night, sleep wouldn't come. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the mother's stiff paw reaching toward her kittens, the gesture frozen in time like a photograph of love interrupted. He tried to return to his routine, made coffee he didn't drink, stood at the kitchen window watching Mary's empty bird feeder sway in the wind. For 2 years, he'd maintained this fragile equilibrium by doing only what was necessary to survive, to invite chaos wild. Unpredictable chaos into this careful balance felt impossible. Yet that night, sleep wouldn't come. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the mother's stiff paw reaching for her kittens. 3 days later, Matt returned with Sarah, a young woman from the conservation center. They stood on Leonard's porch, hesitant, glancing at each other as if deciding who should speak first. We tried pairing them with other animals at the center, Sarah said carefully. An older female cat, two different dogs, even a goat that's raised orphaned fawns before. Nothing worked. The cats at the center are too independent. The dogs too excitable. These kittens need something specific. They need warmth more than medical care. They need, she paused, choosing words. They need what your cat could give them. Leonard crossed his arms. He knew where this was going and he didn't like it. What are you asking? Could you bring Sun to the center, Matt said. Just for a few days. Let us see if there's a connection. Sun was his 4-year-old cream-colored cat, the only living presence that still needed him, that still depended on him. Mary had named her son because every house needs at least one ray of sunshine. Leonard hadn't understood the weight of those words until Mary was gone. Leonard shook his head. I said Mary would find them a mother, Leonard replied, his voice coming out harder than intended. I'm not her. I can't be her. Everyone needs to stop asking me to be her. The silence stretched like a held breath. Sarah looked down at her shoes. Matt rubbed the back of his neck. The gesture so familiar it made Leonard's chest ache. He'd done the same thing as a young officer. Uncertain and hoping for guidance. Leonard's voice softened, but his resolve didn't waver. Sun is old, set in her ways. She's not a rehabilitation animal. She's my companion. The answer is no. After he closed the door, he stood in the hallway with his hand still gripping the knob, listening to their footsteps retreat down the gravel drive. A car door opened, closed. The engine turned over and faded into the distance. Only then did he let go and turn around. Sun was there in her patch of afternoon sunlight, stretched across the living room floor with one cream-colored paw tucked under her chin. She looked at him with those calm green eyes, patient, steady, untroubled by human complications. He sank onto the couch heavily. You're the only sunshine I've got left, he said to her, and it came out like a confession he'd been holding for 2 years. I can't lose you too. A week passed. Leonard tried not to think about the kittens, but he found himself wondering anyway, whether they'd found another solution, whether they were still alive. When Sarah's car pulled up again, he almost didn't answer the door. But she knocked persistently, and finally he opened it, ready to say no again. She stood there holding a pet carrier, looking tired but determined. I'm not asking you to keep them. I'm just asking you to let them meet Sun. 5 minutes. If there's no connection, I'll take them back and we'll figure something else out. Leonard started to refuse, but she was already setting the carrier down, already opening it. 3 Bobcat kittens stumbled out onto his porch, blinking in the afternoon light. They were stronger than they'd been at the roadside, their fur beginning to shine with health. Their eyes were brighter but still held that wariness, that confusion of creatures who'd lost their anchor in the world. Sun appeared in the doorway behind Leonard's legs, drawn by the sound of movement. The cat's fur bristled instantly. She backed away, tail low, ears flattening. A low growl rumbled in her throat, a sound Leonard had heard maybe twice in 4 years. This was a mistake, Leonard said, moving to scoop up the kittens and put them back. Then one of the bobcats made a sound, a weak, mewling cry that pierced the air, high and desperate and heartbreakingly familiar. Sun went completely still. The growl stopped. Her ears swiveled forward. Leonard froze too, recognition hitting him hard. 2 years earlier, Sun had found a stray kitten in the yard, barely alive, infected and failing. Sun had tried to nurse it, had carried it around in her mouth, had curled around it for 3 days while Leonard tried everything he knew to save it. The kitten had made that exact sound before it died in Sun's nest, that particular pitch of need and fear. Sun moved forward, slowly, like something was pulling her against her will. Her body language shifted, the aggression draining away, replaced by something Leonard had seen before but never quite understood. Sun approached the crying kitten with deliberate steps, sniffed its face carefully, then touched her nose to the tiny creature's forehead. The bobcat kitten went quiet. It leaned into Sun, pressing close. Sun stood there for a long moment, trembling slightly. Then she did something Leonard didn't expect. Sun walked to each of the other 2 kittens, sniffed them thoroughly, touched noses with each one. Her tail was up now, curved in a question mark, the tip twitching as she made her decision. Finally, Sun sat down and made a soft chirping sound, the noise she used when she wanted Leonard to follow her. Sarah let out a breath she'd been holding. They've chosen each other. Leonard looked at Sun, at the way her pupils had dilated, at how she kept glancing back and forth between the kittens and Leonard's face, as if asking permission, as if asking for help with something she couldn't do alone. He felt something crack open inside him. That careful distance he'd maintained for 2 years splitting apart. He couldn't say no, not to Sun, not when she was already pressing close to the kittens, sniffing each one again, making those soft maternal sounds he'd almost forgotten she could make. All right, he heard himself say. They can stay. He watched Sarah leave, her relief visible even from behind. Leonard stood on the porch, feeling like he'd just stepped off a cliff. For 2 years, he had built walls around his heart, around his house, around his memories of Mary, safe walls that kept pain out but also kept life out. Now, with 3 words, he had torn a hole in those walls. He looked at Sun, already grooming the smallest kitten with fierce concentration. You know what we've just done? He whispered to her. We've opened the door again. Sun didn't look up. She was too busy being a mother. The house changed overnight. Sun licked the bobcats clean, made a nest from old towels. Leonard found himself checking on them constantly, making sure they were warm, that they were eating the formula Sarah had left behind. One morning, 5 days after the bobcats arrived, Leonard woke to find Sun's stuffed mouse in the bobcat nest. He'd been looking for it. Actually, Sun always wanted the mouse at night, carried it from room to room, slept with it tucked under her chin. Leonard had planned to retrieve it, thinking one of the kittens had stolen it during play. But when he found it, carefully placed in the exact center of the nest, he understood. Sun had put it there deliberately. The mouse wasn't stolen, it was given. Leonard picked up the toy, felt its worn fabric. The places where Sun had groomed it for years. This wasn't just a toy. This was the thing Sun loved most, the object that comforted her when she was anxious, that she protected jealously from anyone else. She'd given it away without being asked, without hesitation. Leonard stood there holding that small gray mouse, and something inside him broke open completely. Not just cracked, but shattered. Sun was teaching him something he'd forgotten, showing him that love wasn't about holding tight to what you had left. It was about opening your hands even when you were afraid. He set the mouse back in the nest, his vision blurring. That night, instead of going to bed, he went into the garage. He'd been avoiding it for 2 years. This space filled with Mary's things, her workbench, her tools, her file boxes of records from every animal she'd ever helped. He found her toolbox buried under tarps and old paint cans. Inside was the notebook, the one she'd kept meticulously updated until the week she got too sick to write. Pages and pages of careful notes, sketches of animal behavior, feeding schedules, development milestones, warning signs of illness. Leonard carried it inside and sat at the kitchen table. He opened to the first page and saw her handwriting, so familiar it hurt. Guidelines for orphaned wildlife, she'd written at the top, then added in smaller letters underneath. For when I'm not here to help. His hands shook. She'd known. She'd known she might not survive. And she'd written this for him, or for whoever might need it after she was gone. He read through the night, every word, every margin note, every sketch. On page 12, he found a passage that stopped him completely. If you're reading this and I'm gone, don't let grief make you stop caring. The animals don't understand withdrawal. They only know you're not there anymore. Be there, Leonard, even when it hurts. His vision blurred. She had written this knowing he would retreat, knowing he would build walls, knowing he would need permission to let those walls come down. He turned to the next page, where Mary had sketched a baby raccoon's feeding schedule. Her handwriting was slightly shaky. Here she must have written this during one of her bad days, when the chemo made her hands tremble. But she'd written it anyway. For him. For moments exactly like this. Leonard closed the notebook carefully and walked to where Sun slept with the Bobcat Kittens. The Blue Ridge Mountains wore their spring-summer colors like a cushion Mary might have made patches of tender green where new leaves caught the yellow morning light, deeper emerald where the pines stood eternal, and here and there the last stubborn dogwood blossoms, white as scattered prayers against the darker slopes. The air carried the scent of wild honeysuckle and the promise of summer storms still weeks away. He knelt down slowly, his knees protesting, and watched them breathe in unison. Then he did something he hadn't done in 2 years. He reached out and gently touched each small head, one by one, the way Mary used to bless the animals she cared for. "All right, Mary," he whispered to the sleeping forms. "I'll follow through." He found himself remembering Mary's voice as he read her patient explanations when she'd first started bringing injured animals home. "Every creature deserves a second chance," she used to say. "Sometimes we're the only chance they'll get." Now, watching son mother these orphaned kittens with such fierce devotion, Leonard finally understood what she'd meant. Love wasn't just about holding on, it was about knowing when to let go. Looking at Son curled protectively around three wild creatures who had learned to trust again, he realized something profound. The same principles that governed human rehabilitation applied here. Consistency, patience, the willingness to show up every day, even when progress seemed impossible. Mary hadn't just been caring for animals all those years, she had been demonstrating a way of being in the world that he was only now beginning to understand. When dawn light started filtering through the windows, he closed the notebook carefully and looked at Son sleeping with the bobcat kittens curled against her belly. "All right, Mary," he whispered. "I understand now. I'll follow through." He sat there as dawn light crept across the kitchen floor. The notebook opened before him and let himself remember the good parts. Mary kneeling in the garden, talking to seedlings. Mary bottle feeding a baby squirrel at 3 in the morning, her face soft with concentration. She had never asked permission to care, never waited until she felt ready. Leonard traced his finger over her handwriting one more time. The letters were slightly shaky. She must have written this during one of her bad days. But she'd written it anyway. For him. He began implementing her protocols that very day, quietly, methodically, the way she would have done. He taped a simple chart to the refrigerator weights, feeding times, notes on behavior, his handwriting cramped beside Mary's neat script. Two versions of care sharing the same page. But more than that, he began implementing her philosophy, the radical act of staying present with vulnerable creatures, of offering care without guarantees, of loving without the promise of permanence. He told them stories while they ate, the way he used to talk to Mary when she was still alive. No need for answers, no need for solutions. Sometimes he talked about his work, about the years he spent trying to understand why people did terrible things. He told them about the case that had nearly ended his career. When he testified that a young man's violence came from a childhood of abuse, not from evil, people had called him soft, said he was making excuses for monsters. One evening, as he reached that part of the story, his voice broke. A bobcat kitten stretched out a paw and touched his cheek. Not playful, not accidental, deliberate. Leonard sat very still. The kitten kept his paw there, its eyes steady on his face. He closed his eyes and felt tears slip down despite his best efforts. The kitten did not pull away. The radio played while he washed dishes one afternoon. An old interview clip came on. Mary's voice filling the kitchen. "My husband once said that not every bad act begins with a bad intention," she said. "Wild animals were the same. They attack to defend themselves. It's instinct, what nature taught them. But that doesn't mean we have to fear them. Human beings have instincts too. Our instinct is to love." He remained frozen in that position, the small weight of the paw anchoring him to the present while his mind drifted to a memory he hadn't touched in years. He could see Mary as clearly as if she were standing in their kitchen, again hair pulled back in that messy ponytail she wore when working, pacing between stove and table, nervous about an upcoming interview. "Do I sound too soft?" she had asked, stopping mid-stride to look at him. "They'll think I'm naive, talking about love like it's practical." He had stood up from his chair, taken her restless hands in his, and told her gently, "Love is the most practical thing we have." Now, sitting here with a wild creature offering comfort without judgment, Leonard finally understood what Mary had been trying to teach him all along. Sun lifted her head from where she lay with the kittens. All three bobcats stopped wrestling and went still. The house felt different, quieter in a way that wasn't empty. Leonard started waking early again. He ate breakfast at regular times instead of skipping meals. He walked the perimeter of the house each morning, checking for hazards, building higher barriers around the porch so the kittens couldn't wander into danger. "Haven't felt useful in a while," he muttered, watching Sun teach one of the bobcats how to hook its claws on the arm of a chair. One afternoon, Leonard watched from the kitchen window as the three kittens discovered a yellow butterfly in the yard. They went into perfect hunting crouches, their tiny bodies trembling with concentration. The butterfly danced just out of reach, completely oblivious to the drama unfolding below. The boldest kitten pounced first, sailing through the air with magnificent confidence and landing face first in a patch of mint. The butterfly fluttered higher. The second kitten tried a more strategic approach, stalking through the grass like a miniature lion, only to trip over its own oversized paws and tumble into its sibling. Sun watched the chaos from the porch, her tail twitching with what Leonard could swear was amusement. When the third kitten finally managed to touch the butterfly's wing with one tiny paw, all three kittens froze in astonishment. The butterfly, apparently as surprised as they were, landed on the nearest kitten's head and stayed there for a full 10 seconds before floating away. Leonard found himself actually laughing for the first time in months, while brushing their fur one afternoon. One of the bobcats suddenly whipped around and bit Leonard's hand. The teeth broke skin, drew blood. Pain shot up his arm. Leonard jerked back instinctively but forced himself to stay still. His heart hammered. The bobcat stared at him, ears flattened, body coiled with tension. For several seconds, neither moved. Then something shifted in the kitten's expression. The ears came forward slightly. The rigid posture softened, slowly, carefully. It lowered its head and touched its rough tongue to the bite mark. It licked the wound gently, over and over, with what could only be called remorse. Sun sat on the couch arm, watching without blinking. She hadn't moved during the bite, hadn't intervened, just observed, as if this lesson needed to happen. The bobcat made a soft, whimpering sound and pressed its face against Leonard's palm. He stayed frozen, barely breathing, as the small creature continued its careful ministrations. This wasn't instinct. This was understanding, the recognition of having caused harm and the desire to heal it. "You're learning," Leonard said softly, his voice unsteady, "how to hurt and how to heal, in your own way." The bobcat licked his hand once more, then curled against Sun's side but kept one paw resting on Leonard's knee, maintaining connection. Another afternoon, he found one of the kittens dragging his yard broom across the grass, tangled in the bristles, rolling helplessly. He laughed, actually laughed, for the first time in months. "Spent 40 years analyzing criminal psychology," he called out. "Now I'm raising little criminals who wreck my house." The bobcats grew quickly, their legs lengthened, their movements became more graceful and powerful. By the time a year had passed, they were nearly full-grown, their coats thick and healthy. Sarah came back with 2 other conservation staff and a folder of paperwork. "It's time," she said gently. "They need to go back to the wild." Leonard nodded but said nothing. He was afraid of losing them, more afraid of what it would do to Sun, who had mothered these creatures with such fierce devotion. But Sun surprised him. On the morning the staff returned, the cat walked onto the porch and touched noses with each bobcat, one by one, slow and deliberate. The bobcats responded in kind, pressing close for a moment before stepping back. They didn't need to be carried or coaxed. They moved toward the forest edge on their own, looking back once before disappearing into the trees. One of them paused at the porch step where Leonard stood. It lifted a muddy paw and pressed it against his hand. Then it was gone. Leonard looked at the paw print on his skin. He did not wipe it away. Sun took to sitting on the windowsill each morning, looking toward the forest. Not anxiously, not sadly, just looking. She still ate well, still played with her toys, still curled at Leonard's feet each night as if to say everything was all right. An autumn afternoon arrived with a cool breeze that set the porch wind chime swaying. Sun lifted her head from the windowsill, from the tree line. Three shapes sat watching. Leonard walked outside and smiled. Don't need to come closer, I know you came back. The bobcat sat for a few minutes, then turned and melted into the forest. It happened again 2 weeks later. The wind chime rang, that particular crystalline sound it made when the breeze came from the east. Sun's head shot up. The cat jumped down from the windowsill and ran to the front door, looking back at Leonard with bright, expectant eyes. Leonard felt warmth spread through his chest. He smiled, actually smiled, the kind that reached his eyes. They're coming closer this time. He stood up from his chair, his joints protesting slightly. Maybe all the way to the porch. He walked to the door, anticipating the sight of three familiar bobcat faces, his hand wrapped around the doorknob. He was already planning what he'd say to them, how he'd greet them without spooking them. Maybe he'd bring out some of the dried meat he kept for Sun. He opened the door, the smile still on his face. Sunny stood there, not bobcats, his daughter, the daughter he hadn't seen in 4 years. Not since the fight 3 months before Mary died, when grief had turned them both into strangers who said unforgivable things. Leonard's smile died, his whole face went slack. The warmth in his chest transformed instantly into something else, something that felt like ice water and electricity at the same time. His hand tightened on the doorknob, knuckles white, the only thing keeping him upright. He couldn't speak. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. His mind went completely blank. Every thought scattering like startled birds. Sunny looked terrified. Her hands were clasped together in front of her waist, fingers twisting around each other. Her eyes were already red, like she'd been crying in the car. Working up courage. She tried to smile, but it came out wrong, shaky, more like a grimace. Like she was trying to convince them both that this might be okay, that he might not slam the door in her face. The fake smile wavered, collapsed. Her chin trembled. "Dad," she whispered, just that one word, but it broke something. Leonard made a sound, something between a gasp and a sob. His vision blurred instantly. Tears he didn't know were there spilled down his face. His chest heaved once, violently, 2 years of grief and loneliness and regret crushing inward all at once. He stepped forward and pulled her into his arms, hard, desperate, like she might disappear if he didn't hold tight enough. His whole body shook. Sunny collapsed against him. A sob tore out of her throat, raw and broken. Her arms came up around his back, gripping his shirt, holding on just as desperately. "I'm sorry," she gasped into his shoulder. "I'm so sorry. I thought it was my fault." Leonard couldn't answer. He could only hold her, one hand on the back of her head, the other around her shoulders, both of them crying so hard neither could breathe properly. "Mom got sick right after I moved away," Sunny choked out. "I thought if I'd stayed, if I'd been there, maybe she wouldn't have. I thought you blamed me. I blamed myself. I was so afraid. I didn't know how to come back. I didn't know how to face you. I thought you hated me for leaving her, for leaving you." "No," Leonard finally found his voice, hoarse and thick. "No, baby, no." He held her tighter, if that was possible. "It wasn't your fault. It was never your fault." His voice cracked completely. "I should have told you. Should have called. Should have." He couldn't finish, just held her while they both shook with 4 years of accumulated pain pouring out. They stood on the porch like that for a long time, holding each other while the wind chime sang softly overhead, while Sun watched from inside with knowing eyes, while the afternoon light turned golden around them. Finally, when the sobs quieted to ragged breathing, when they could both stand without shaking quite so much, Leonard pulled back just enough to look at his daughter's face. He cupped her cheek with one hand, wiping tears with his thumb. "Tears. You're home," he said, his voice still unsteady. "That's all that matters now. You're home." That evening, as the last light faded from the mountains, Leonard made dinner Mary's recipe for chicken soup, the one she used to make when words weren't enough. Sunny set the table without being asked, her hands remembering where everything belonged. They ate in the kind of silence that comes not from having nothing to say, but from having said everything that mattered, through the window. Leonard caught a glimpse of movement at the forest edge. Three shapes sat watching, then melted back into the trees like shadows returning home. They still come back, Sonny said softly, following his gaze. They remember, Leonard replied. Animals don't forget kindness. Sonny reached across the table and squeezed his hand. Neither do daughters. Later, as they washed dishes side by side, their shoulders bumped once. Then again, until they fell into an easy rhythm neither of them remembered learning. Sun wove between their legs, purring so loudly it filled the kitchen with contentment. Inside the house, Sun lay still on the windowsill, eyes half closed, her lower lip twitching slightly, as if she were keeping a sweet secret. Now he no longer had only her as his ray of sunshine. Every rescue begins with a heartbeat that refuses to give up. We're grateful you chose to listen to this one. If you'd like to hear more stories like this, a simple like or subscribe means the world to us.